Welcome to day 2 of the 2025 American Gem Trade Association's Inspire Seminar Series, sponsored by the AGS, the American Gem Society. Gems of salvation or stones of damnation. In a 17th century context marked by fear of witchcraft, can country of origin be determined for European jets? With us this afternoon is Sarah Caldwell-Steele, widely considered the world's leading expert in black gemstone identification. She was awarded a fellowship of the Gemological Association of Great Britain in 2013 and a Diamond Fellowship in 2015. She holds a first degree in geology from the University of Durham. That's over there, not North Carolina. And has returned to Durham in 2019 as a doctoral researcher in archaeology. Her multidisciplinary and multi-period PhD thesis focuses on the gemological classification, identification, and interpretation of black artifacts within the archaeological record, focusing in particular on country of origin analysis for the Jet group. Please join me in welcoming Sarah Caldwell-Steele.
Thank you. Thank you. How do I get this working? Does it just go on its own, or do I need to press something? Ah, perfect. Okay. So I'm hoping, well, as most of you are my friends in the audience, you do know what jet is, but just in case you don't, jet was defined first in 1928 by Stack as being formed from a drifted wood with a secondary impregnation of bitumen from its surrounding sedimentary environment. However, there is absolutely no geological consensus as to how jet is formed or indeed what it is. So we have two other theories that have been proposed. The first one, Kuhl et al. Studying a forest in Peru, said that actually they believe jetonization was a rapid form of mummification in which a waterlogged wood is re-exposed to sunlight and crucially to aerobic conditions. They said this takes nothing in the way of geological time. They can observe it happening in real time in the laboratory. And interestingly, they noted that the sort of chemical bonds they were seeing forming in the wood were identical to the bonds we see in the laboratory when we make a material called phenol formaldehyde, which was accredited as being the first fully synthetic plastic, generally retailed as Bakelite or a casphenolic. And interestingly, Bakelite was the biggest threat certainly to the Whitby jet market. It's very difficult to distinguish between them. And the Bakelite Corporation retailed their material as jet till as late as the 1940s. There's a third theory proposed. This was Travers and Colvard, who are geologists working in Jet Basin in Utah. So again, an American theory. They said actually they believe that jetonization is totally species dependent. So certain woods are resinous. If these woods decay and those resins can't flow away from the lignin of the wood, they're trapped within the framework and they go on to modify the coalification medium. So all these three models give a material which macroscopically, according to these researchers, look like a material that we would identify as jet. There is a bigger problem, however, at foot here, because technically jet is the stone which cannot be named. Why do I say that? Well, basically, there is no such thing as jets. The term jet is merely an abbreviation of the word jetonized, and jetonized means that a botanical species has been preserved, showing its vegetable form. So we would include the petrified woods of Arizona, for example, as jetonized materials. Also, the term initially was coined to refer to the infill material we see down the microscope in the cells of one variety of European jets that we call cord jet, never taken to describe a macroscopic gem material. And somebody else who realized there was a problem with this nomenclature for jets was Mary Stopes, better known for reproductive medicine, but she was an amazing paleobotanist. She worked for the British government during the First World War on jet, amongst other coals. And she came up with this saying that the term jet has the same usefulness as the term cheese. And I would pretty much agree with her. So we don't know what it is, we don't really know how it's made, and we've absolutely no idea what to call this gem material. Can we identify it when we come across it? Well, I would argue that we have problems here as well. So most of the gemological knowledge we have in our teaching notes and in the gem books come from archaeologists. Archaeologists are forensic scientists. They dig up a grave. That body is wearing black jewellery. In this case, these are early Bronze Age jet beads. And the archaeologists traditionally have then described that material. They've gone, oh, here's some jet, let's describe the gemological properties. So we see strange terms in there. Generally, we see strange colours. So the archaeologists believe that jet can be black or brown because they excavate black and brown artefacts. If we're lucky, they might consult Pliny the Elder or the Venerable Bede or some expert on jet. But what they generally do then is panic and they put it in a drawer and they forget about it because jet absolutely terrifies the British archaeologists. What about the geologists? Well, I would argue that they've heavily drawn on archaeological knowledge for the description of this material. But again, I think what they've generally done is gone down Pueblo, found out who's selling jets, bought some and said, oh, let's describe it. So you'll probably see this if you go to the Pueblo show this week. I've not been over there yet. This was last year. So you could buy a kilogram of jet there for $45. And this material is a stunning lapidary material. If you get a chance, go and visit Lee Downey's stand. He's a master carver, and the things he can do in this material are quite phenomenal. But unfortunately, it is not jet. The Russians themselves, this material they call gagat. It comes from the Irkutsk area around Lake Baikal in Siberia. It's been used for at least 2,500 years, a really important archaeological product there. But the Russians have at least 11 different names for this material, things like Zarino, Matagan, different terms for the same, different species of the same material. And coal petrologists, especially somebody called Kushnikov, writing in the 1930s, said it was difficult to find any other material associated with many false concepts as jets. Even the definitions in the dictionaries are contradictory, and this material, which is Siberian sapropelite coal, has nothing in common whatsoever with the jets that we have known and used in Europe for thousands of years. So we do have a problem. And what's happened is, because we've used lots of different materials as our samples to describe our gemological properties, we have something that I generally call nonsensical gemological values. So we'll see vague hardnesses generally quoted on the Mohs scale between 2 and 4. It's not technically possible to measure the hardness of coal using Mohs, so we shouldn't see any values there at all. Vague lustres, generally they would describe jet as a dull, waxy, resinous material. That's not the case. Every true jet on the planet has a mirror-like lustre. We shouldn't see any other values there other than mirror-like. We see weird specific gravities, and we also have problems with refractive index and reflectance, which I'll come back to. And these vague colours, blacks, browns, even other colours. And that really leads to confusion regarding the stability and then the care instructions. Generally, we'll see don't get it wet, don't put it in the sun, don't spray perfume, don't ultrasonic it. This is a remarkably stable material when it is a true jet. Even the sapropelite coals are very stable, so we shouldn't see those instructions. Now, trying to help the matter, in 2016, CIBJO came up with the term biogenic, and they were going to apply this to the organic materials. So they said that the expression organic was going to be maintained and it would be used for biogenic gem materials composed of organic matter and organic molecules as defined by chemistry. Now, there is a problem with this. If we look at the chemistry definition of organic, it means it's a substance that has the carbon-hydrogen bonds. We'd expect some oxygen, some nitrogen, and some sulfur in there as well. So jet is a hydrocarbon. It's definitely made from hydrogen and carbon bonds. The problem is chemistry doesn't differentiate between natural and synthetic materials. So all true plastics are also organics. And I don't think many gemologists in the room would want to see synthetic plastics classed as organic gemstones, but that is what we're going to have if we're going to cherry pick terms from other disciplines. Now, thank you. Writing in Gamma magazine, in his words, to clarify and remove any possible ambiguity, said the following materials would not be considered biogenic in the strictest sense: amber, amylite, opalized mollusks, silicified wood, mammoth ivory, as well as other materials of a biological origin found in a geological context, like jet, and then they add not technically a fossil. Now, I'm 5 years into a PhD looking at the paleontology of jet. It came as a shock to my supervisors and me to find out that CIBJO think that this isn't a fossil. And when I asked Rui where this information came from, because CIBJO doesn't cite sources, they said we asked an American a geologist. I'm like, why would you not ask somebody that knew about jet? But anyway, they didn't. To be classed as a fossil, something needs to show one of a number of types of fossilization. And this specimen here, it's not the best lapidary piece of jet, but this is a piece of cord, Whitby jet. So on the outer skin there, you're looking at jetonized material. Jetonization is a form of fossilization. Then the sort of more shiny band is pyritization. That's also classed as a type of fossilization. And then in the middle, we've got probably some carbonaceous mineralization and some silicification. So this one specimen has at least 4 types of fossilization on it. Jet is 100% a fossil. And even more problematic is, as I said at the beginning, the European jets are fossilized wood with a secondary impregnation of oil from the surrounding sedimentary environment. Where does that oil come from? Well, in the case of Whitby jet and the other European jets, essentially it's North Sea oil. In geology, we have a convention for how jet oil is formed. We call it biogenic theory, that organic organisms produce by way of biogenic process organic compounds. So oil is made by biogenic process. This gemstone is made at least 50% by biogenic process. I would argue, actually, of all the organics, jet is the most biogenic of all because it is formed geologically by biogenic process. So we've got a real problem. And far from clarifying and removing ambiguity, I would argue, and I know the members of the Amber Council that I've spoken to in Poland would argue, that we are absolutely in an organic crisis gemologically, because those of us that work in the tree stones, the amber and the jet, we can't even define our materials gemologically, never mind try to protect our industries, because the World Jewelry Council doesn't know what it is. And the last time I asked Rui, what does CIBJO think jet and amber are they biogenic, are they organic? He said CIBJO don't know, which isn't helpful. So what about a coal approach? Jet is technically a precious coal. Can we use coal geology to help us? Well, in the 1980s, an archaeologist worked with a British coal petrologist, and they're organic, they're economic geologists. So what they do is they take some coal, they don't even look at it, they don't care what it looks like. They grind it up, they mix it with resin, they polish the block, they put it under oil immersion, and they fire a light beam at the surface. They measure the degree of reflectance, because they found that the reflectance of coals is related to the amount of calories you get when you burn that coal. So the higher the reflectance, the more calories, the higher the rank of the coal. But with jet, it was found to have a reflectance of 0.2%, which makes it the poorest grade coal from a calorific perspective, and we call these lignites. Now, no gemologist clearly ever went and looked at a lignite. Certainly the GEMA and the GIA teaching notes were teaching students that jet is lignite. It's in every definition, in every dictionary, they'll say jet is a lignite. The item on the left there is a lignite. I've spent many, many hours in the National History Museum in London studying the coals and other museums, and I can assure you that's a bog standard lignite. Now, I'm a lapidary, I can polish a turd if I want to, but I can assure you I cannot get a decent luster on a lignite. We just can't. This is not a lapidary material. The material on the right, however, is a high-grade lapidary material, but nobody ever compared it. Nobody ever said, hang on, that looks really shiny. Why is it giving a really low reflectance? Well, we have a problem because jet is a humic coal. A humic coal is a coal made from botanical land plants. Essentially, we bury a forest and we cook it. So it's a metamorphic process. And the rank of a coal is a function of the pressure and temperature. So the higher the metamorphism, the higher the rank, but we don't want to go too far, for God forbid we go over the top and make some graphite, or even worse, some diamonds. We don't want that. We want to keep our coal nice and jet-like. But jet isn't a normal humic coal. It's something called a perhydrous coal. That means it has a really abnormal amount of hydrogen in there. So hydrogen modifies the coal, and the hydrogen's coming from those oils that have impregnated the wood. And perhydrous coals actually have a huge discrepancies in relation to composition and rank, and most importantly, and most relevant to gemology, that they exhibit something we call reflectance suppression. I had many conversations with the late, great Alan Hodgkinson about this phenomenon because it's not known within gemology. So when we test the reflectance value of jet, he will give an abnormally low reflectance, and that's why we see jet described as a lignite. It is not a lignite. It is a much higher ranking coal. It's suppressing the reflectance, and because refractive index is a function of reflectance, Alan was under the opinion, as I am, that the refractive index that we quote for jet of 1.66 distance vision is way too low. Jet's probably over the limit of the refractometer in reality. A year or so ago, there was an exhibition of coal actually in London, and they actually called this exhibition Coalescence to describe the optical properties of high-grade coals. This was me stood under 2.5 tons of the best quality Welsh anthracite, which is a really high-ranking coal. Most people would never see a high-ranking coal of this grade, and looking up into this installation, there was something akin, you could have probably said you were looking at an adamantine luster on this coal. The rank is so high. It really was quite phenomenal. So we don't know what to call it. We don't know how to identify it. We don't know what it's made of. Sibjo don't even know whether it's an organic or biogenic. But that is a major problem because this isn't a normal gem material. This is a culturally important gem material. Civilizations have used this material for thousands of years and attributed very special properties to it. And with culturally important materials like jets and jades, we need to be able to establish country of origin because the narrative will change fundamentally depending on what cultures are using it. Now, as part of my PhD, one of the research sample suites that I'm working on are the first jewelry items in the first English permanent settlements in the US. So we've got 49 jet artifacts that have been identified at Jamestown in Virginia. These are the most iconic. They use these quite often on their advertising for the museum, if you've ever been to Jamestown. These had been identified as Spanish Jesuit crucifixes. The jet is believed to have come from Spain. But we have a major problem because 3 ships left London in 1606, the Discovery, the Susan Constance, and the Godspeed. On board were 144 people. The records from the Virginia Company show that their endeavours in the New World were extraordinarily complex. They weren't just looking at entrepreneurship, looking for ways of making money. What they wanted to do was build a new Anglican church, Church of England in the New World. Many of the people in this company believe that we'd devolved from the Elizabethan roots and we need to draw it back. There should not have been any Catholic on any of those ships because the political implications, had they have been, would have been quite devastating. The archaeologists, therefore, were incredibly surprised when they excavated the remains of Gabriel Archer, who was captain of the Godspeed, who had been laid to rest in the most prominent position under the nave of the First Church of England in America. On his coffin was laid this silver casket. On top is etched a letter M. We know there are bones in there, and we know there's an ampulla that we believe has blood in it. This essentially is a Catholic reliquary. The M, we believe, stands for Cuthbert of Maine. He was the first of the British priests that had been trained on the continent to try to rally British Catholics back to Rome post-Reformation. He was the first to be tried for treason and the first to be executed. Why did they take his remains to the New World? They should not have been there. But the presence of those jet artifacts and the other 40-odd artifacts, many of them beads, have been identified as rosaries. The fact that the archaeologists believe these are from Spain, they have written early American colonial history to suggest that there were Catholics on those early ships, and therefore there's something really quite sinister going on. Certainly the settlers themselves, if they got a whiff of anybody being a Catholic, there was a problem. So the guy that had been destined to be the president, first president of Jamestown, and Edward Maria Wingfield, he was suspected as a Catholic. Him and another man were tried very early on. They were both found guilty. The other man was shot and Wingfield was sent back home. They were not tolerating anybody who they suspected of being a recusant Catholic. So why would the archaeologists believe wholeheartedly that these jet items are for Spain? Well, basically, we have absolutely no idea what is going on really in England at that time period from a jet perspective, but we do know it's the heyday of the Spanish jet industry. So the jet industry in Spain has sprung up around a pilgrimage called the Camino de Santiago. I did some of it last year. It nearly killed me. It was horrific. But it walks right across the Pyrenees, across Asturias, over to Galicia, and it's centred at Santiago de Compostela. The jet industry is still centred there in Spain today. In the 17th century, jet there is concerned with protection, magical protection of the person. So on the left, we have Anna Mauricia of Austria. This is painted in 1604. She's Infanta of both Spain and Portugal. Her father's Philip III of Spain. And this child is spiritually armoured with gem materials. She's got crucifixes, she's got sacred hearts, she's got a coral wand in her hand. She's wearing a magic belt with pommenders and bells suspended around it to ward away evil. And in the middle there, a really huge hega. Now the hega or the figa, sometimes called the phallic fist, represents female genitalia, and the thumb, the phallus. How it works is if the evil eye overlooks this child, the evil will be so appalled by the obscenity of the hega that it's going to go away. You're going to divert the gaze. We also know in Spain at this time that jet's used as a fashion item. We've got Margaret Teresa, Holy Roman Empress there on the right, wearing an amazing stomacher of jet and some huge jet earrings. She's last of the Habsburgs, as you can probably tell by the jaw there. So we know that jet is absolutely in its boom period in Spain at that time. In England, meanwhile, jet has been banned post-English Reformation. It is so associated with Catholicism, if you are stopped and searched and have jet on your person, you're going to be facing a day in court on a charge of treason, essentially. And there are many accounts I've found where that happens. But somebody who is prepared to die wearing the material is Mary, Queen of Scots. This is one of very few paintings of her in her lifetime. This is a Hardwick Hall Sheffield portrait. It's a bit dark, but take my word for it. Mary is absolutely festooned in jet chains down her chest, almost identical to the one I'm wearing today. She's using the language of stones, the hidden language of stones, to make a political statement. She's saying, I am chained to my faith, I'm chained to Catholicism, and I'm denoting this by the fact I'm wearing jet. And she goes to her execution in 1597, and we're given a good description of the day, and we're told she's wearing a black velvet widow's dress with buttons of jet that are carved into tiny acorns all down the front. So nobody should have British jet on those ships because it had been outlawed. But could there be a reason why it would have been acceptable for us to pack those people up with those ships and send with them Whitby jet, English jet, to the New World? Well, I believe there is a reason. In 1597, King James I has written a treatise called Demonology. He's obsessed with witchcraft. He's had a really bad incident in Scotland with some witches that call up a storm, and his marriage is nearly ruined. But within this book, it's heavily plagiarising Malleus Maleficarum, which was written in 1468. And the first chapters in Malleus tell us that to disbelieve in witchcraft is the greatest of heresies. It's a greater heresy, presumably, than being a Catholic. So you'd maybe just about get away with it. But I'd argue that really in the 16th century, jet was used in the British Isles to protect the person and your house against witchcraft. This is an artifact from Scarborough Museum, which is near Whitby. And here we have a charm against witchcraft. It'll strengthen and fasten your loosened teeth, bonus. And that belief system attributed to the 16th century. So in James I's Demonology, he tells us that the worst evil and the most prevalent witchcraft is in the most furthest part of the world, and that is right here in America, essentially. So those people would have known for sure there were going to be witches when they landed in Virginia. It makes sense then that they would want to protect themselves. Now, do I have any other evidence to suggest that these crucifixes are to do with witchcraft? Well, I think we do. One of the crucifixes from Jamestown, the one on the right there, you'll notice has a drill hole front to back. Now, the archaeologists have thought, well, the lapidary was a bit stupid. Funnily enough, archaeologists generally think that jet workers are stupid through history when you read about them. But I would argue there's no way that that lapidary drilled that hole front to back if they're going to wear this cross on the person. The others are all drilled side to side, so they're going to lay nice and flat. This one, the minute I saw this with this drill hole, it reminded me of a device we have in Whitby Museum. So the one on the left is called the Egton witch charm. It was found nailed to a witch post, which is a post at the end of a panel that separates the door from the ingle nook on really old British cottages called crook frame buildings. So this one, we believe the house was 14th century, nailed to a beam in the house. This was never designed to be worn. The iconography on the Whitby one is cruder than the Jamestown ones, but stylistically, we have some similarities. I would also argue that the Egton one, either whoever made that had never seen an image of the corpus of Christ, because his head's Christ's head is at the top and his arm's down at 45 degrees, and the drill hole actually is drilled right through the head of Christ, which in the 16th century would have been quite disrespectful. But I would say that the corpus of Christ on this device is secondary to the function of this cross. It's a witch charm disguised as a Christian cross, essentially. So is there any literary evidence to support this? Well, we have there a 14th, 15th century image of a jet worker, and it's all about the shoes, isn't it? I mean, look at them. But we do have a really good text, which is called Ball's Leech Book. It was written somewhere around 950 AD, so it's over 1,000 years old. It's written in Old English, but it gives us 8 powers of jet within the Leech Book. The most important power it tells us is its ability to protect against thunderbolts. Thunder, and obviously especially lightning, which is witnessed to kill and obviously destroy a building, was a real problem in the medieval world. And reading the accounts from the first settlers in Jamestown, although they'd encountered storms in the British Isles, nothing prepared them for the storms on the eastern seaboard of America. And I know the first time I ever went to Connecticut, there was a tremendous storm, and I thought it was the, end of the world. I'd never experienced anything like that. So they were absolutely terrified of thunder. And they interpreted it to mean that something was very wrong in the supernatural world, in the New World, these storms. So we also have a direct reference there to household protection. So in whatsoever house jet is in, a fiend or an enemy may not be. So we're going to use this material in the 10th century to protect our houses. We also have a power that witchcraft hurteth not the man who has the stone with him. So you wear it on your person as well. Direct reference to witchcraft protection. Also, anybody who has a loathly fiend upon them, which we have taken to interpret somebody with a demonic possession. And certainly in the medieval lapidaries, the primary purpose of jet was you burn it and you'd waft it over a person to use it as an act of exorcism, to banish a demon from somebody. We also have a recipe in there against elf and unknown charm. And in Old English, the word for charm is sidsa, which we think comes from the Icelandic word cedar, which is a type of pre-Christian shamanic magic. We're probably borrowing Norse beliefs associated with jet as well at this time period. There are 2 other powers listed on there, and they're both to do with health. One is it's going to protect you against snake bite. Carving of snakes and jet has been essentially, we've got a good 2,000 years history of carving snakes from jet. And the other power is it cures cellulite, which is obscure, but one to remember. Now, could it be possible that these belief systems that are over 1,000 years old would still exist in relation to this material? Well, I believe it does, and certainly in 1600, when those boats left the UK, those belief systems would have still been valid. Here we have a Victorian hat pin carved in an acorn, and jet is always carved into acorns because this again is a reference to Norse mythology. Thor, the thunder god, lives in oak groves. Apparently oak trees are struck by lightning way more than any other species. They essentially hold more water, tend to be the tallest tree in the forest, get struck very often. So here we have a Victorian artifact, and still there on the card with it saying women wear it as protection against lightning. So people often ask me, especially crystal healing practitioners, certainly here, this is at Keno. Jet's obviously often described as the witch's stone. Where does this come from? Today, modern practitioners that identify as witches use this material. They believe that jet is a material sacred to them. Actually, they're probably wrong. This material has protected against witches for at least 1,000 years, but it's interesting to see at Tucson, it's still retailed as the witch's stone. Just in case you're tempted to go and buy some, and it's $80 a pound, so dearer than down at Keno. This is just 2 lumps of house coal. I told this vendor this 2-3 years ago, and actually went back last year, and it was still there, and I went over to take the picture, and she said, "Oh, that's really good carving material. The world expert on jet came and looked at that last year and said it was really good." I said, "Yeah, that was me." And then she went, "Oh." I can only assume in Arizona they have no need for house coal, and this was not something that they were familiar with. So what am I going to do? We have got the entire of American history resting on me being able to attribute country of origin for those crucifixes, because if they were Catholic, then we're all Catholics and we're going to carry on with colonial history as it's written today. If those are Whitby witch charms, it means that folkloric beliefs crossed the Atlantic way earlier than expected, and they're protecting themselves from witches. Well, the first thing I have to do is build a database so that we can do the sort of research that we need for country of origin testing. There is no database on Earth at the minute for black organic materials, predominantly jets. Now, in the Whitby area, we have 300 abandoned jet mines. We're not legally allowed to mine jet, which means we illegally, artisanally mine it. But we do have abandoned mines at our disposal. This mine is about 20 miles from Whitby. They're incredibly dangerous. Their roofs are unpropped. And really, I can only go in the mines with caving club members with me. It's very dirty underground. These rocks are oil-generating rocks, so there's a lot of crude down there, lots of bitumen products as well. But it's the only opportunity I get to see jet in the whole stratigraphy. Most of the jet that we have today is mined on the coastal regions or washes in as a sea wash product. Imagine if you had, diamonds outcropping in sea cliffs. They're not going to survive long enough for any researcher to study them, and it's very similar with jet. It barely survives a tide. If it outcrops, it'll be taken. So underground really is the only opportunity I have to come up with theories as to how jet is being formed. Now, there is somewhere else in the world, and I need jet from all the obviously global localities. The most jet on the planet that's been worked and mined today is in Turkey. This is a material called Altutasha. We weren't entirely sure whether this was a true jet or another product, because there have been many, many academic papers written on Altutasha recently by people claiming to be members of faculties of engineering and earth sciences at Turkish universities. But they publish in English, but the information is very convoluted, doesn't really make any sense. So Altutasha, they tell us, is a black amber. They refer to it as black amber. And they say that lignites and the black amber are found together, which is quite good that they're recognizing that this isn't a lignite. They then go on to say that black amber is formed when a resin-rich wood is fossilized. So Turkey is the only place in the world that I've come across where the earth scientists believe that amber is formed from wood and not as a resin of wood. They believe it's the body of the wood. Strange. And then resin-free woods, they're telling us, becomes lignite. They say it comes in black, but also velvet black. I'm not entirely sure what colour that is. Brown, grey or green. And the most interesting thing is that when it is mined, it is soft when first excavated and only hardens when it's exposed to the air. So when I first read this, and this actually finds its way into the gemological text as well, I've seen this referenced. So at first I thought, well, this material cannot be a true jet if it's mined soft. And then I thought, well, actually, I've never seen jet further than a few 100 feet into the stratigraphy at Whitby, and that's always been exposed to the air for a number of years. So what if our jet is actually soft if we go far enough into the cliff? So we decided we really needed to go to the region of Turkey to sort it out, and it has been mapped extensively. It's right in the very far east of Turkey, close to the Georgian and Syrian border. It's a military control zone. I can't go there without government clearance. And the Turkish government said I couldn't go unless I had Turkish geologists with me. So we had to arrange for some geologists from the Ministry of Mining to go with us. Some of you might recognise Dr. Cheetham Lule there, who luckily was able to translate for me. So we headed off to Turkey. The jet is mined there at above 2,200 metres, so at a really high altitude. It's a tectonically very active area. A lot of faulting in the mines cause problems, and it's generally a 1 or 2 man operation. The miner there in the middle at his mines, and him and his brother were operating a dozen or so mines in the Dutlu Mountains. The mines, just like the Victorian Whitby mines, are completely unpropped. They don't use explosives because it would damage the gem materials. And because it was rather dangerous, we did ask, should we have hard hats? And he said to me, if Allah wishes you to come out of my mine alive, you will live. So had to go with it. So the Turkish geologists decided they weren't going to go past the entrance, so I would take one for the team. So crawled on my hands and knees for a few 100 metres and was rewarded at the end by the most jet I've ever seen in situ. And here we have 2 seams of jet, essentially 2 planks of wood, probably deposited on a very, on the same day possibly. And the material at the bottom, the Turkish say is black amber, and the material at the top there, they say is lignite. If we were in a European context, we'd say we have hard jet and brittle jet there. We wouldn't call them amber. So we also saw other varieties of jet, which are similar to the varieties we certainly have in France, Spain, France, and England. So on the left there, essentially a petrified wood with a jetonized bark or outside skin on it, and some peramineralized jet there. It's generally calcite. And we also saw a variety that's not previously been documented. We don't even know what to call that. But again, that is asking, challenging us with questions as to how this material is formed when we've got spots here where the jetonization seems to be starting in the middle of the wood and working out rather than it from the outside working in. So along with working with the miners, I was able to work with the manufacturers, and there are entire shopping malls dedicated to jet in Altu, which was like my idea of heaven. And we worked with some of the manufacturers. The lady on the right there is quite a formidable individual. She's the only lady that's working in this shopping mall. And I've found, really from a research perspective, a lot of my research is autoethnographical, so I document my interactions with this material as a lapidary and the interactions of other people that work these materials. And I've found that if I go into a situation like this as an academic and say, give me a piece of jet, I want to do advanced testing on it, they sort of say, jog on, which is what I say when academics come to my shop in Whitby. But if you sit down and work and carve the materials with these people, you learn a lot more. So she wanted to test my metal. She said, well, okay, I'll speak to you, but there's a bit of jet, there's a mount, make that brooch. So I managed to do that, and she announced that I showed some potential, which is good. I've been working this material commercially since I was 11. so over 40 years. She'd been working it since she was 9, so she pointed out she'd at least 2 years on me. And then I asked her if she would mind cutting some of our jet, some Whitby jet. And it was absolutely fascinating because she started cutting it and she said, right, she said, well, I can smell you've got a high oil content in here. It's a different oil to ours, though. Yours is smelling more like diesel. Ours smells more like petrol. She said, you've got more sulfur in yours. She said, it's less grindable than ours. She said, it's slightly more resinous. She said, ours is more brittle. She looked at the luster and said, actually, I prefer yours to ours. But this lady who has had nothing in the way of formal education was able to give an in-depth chemical analysis of my material and compare it with hers, which would outweigh any academic paper that has been performed. And it just shows really the importance of practitioner experience and the fact as academics and as gemologists, we must speak to these people that are the lapidaries. They know the stones. You don't know a stone until you've cut it. I believe that wholeheartedly, and this lady proved that. So what did I learn in Turkey? Well, firstly, never go down a mine without a hair bubble. That was bad. Firstly, jet is black. So despite all these academic papers that cite every other author saying it can be black, brown, green, velvet black, I asked every miner and every manufacturer what colour's black, and it actually got quite embarrassing in the end, because one of them actually said, I thought she was supposed to be the expert. It's black, obviously. But they confirmed it was black. And when I said to them, well, I've been on your websites, and you all say it can be brown or green, and they went, oh, no, that's not us. That's what the academics say. You know, it shows the importance. We must go to source. We can't rely on word of mouth information regarding something even as simple as colour as this gem material. Secondly, jet is not soft. When I said to the miner, is it true that the jet is taken from the ground soft, you mould it into shape and it only hardens on exposure to the air? He said, yes, that's true. And then I said, show me the soft jet. And he just handed me a piece of jet and he's like, there. I'm like, this isn't soft. So I asked Cheatham again to ask him in terminology that we'd use if we were talking to a potter. Say, is it taken from the ground malleable like clay? Do you shape it like you would a pot? Does it dry and you sort of essentially fire it? And he said, no, no, it's a lapidary term, hard and soft. Exactly the same terms as we have in the jet industries in Europe. It's nothing to do with hardness, Mohs hardness. This is to do with stability. You know, a hard jet is stable, a soft jet is less so. They keep their soft jet underwater until they polish it. And interesting with jet, the act of polishing it seals the surface. It heals any surface fractures and makes it more stable. And the best polished items will survive at least 5,000-10,000 years in the archaeological record, but only if they've been polished, because that stops oxygen entering the surface. And most importantly, I learned that I will follow a very strange man that doesn't speak a word of English in a very distant land down a very dark hole for hundreds of metres if he promises he's going to show me jet at the end of it. So now that I've got this sample suite, what am I going to do with it? Well, we can't use any of our visual standard logical techniques, so we're not going to use a polariscope or a refractometer or anything like that. So I have, however, looked at all the normal gemological advanced testing methods. So spectra have been published by archaeologists in FTIR that they're claiming is generic and can give country of origin for Whitby jet. When I test jets from other localities, and at the top there we've got German, Turkish, Spanish, Whitby, French and Portuguese jet, what you'll see is they are essentially giving identical spectra. These are looking at the vibrational bonds in the jet, and there is absolutely nothing to choose between them. Where we can use FTIR, however, is distinguish between true jets and non-jets. The bottom there we have a spectra for Whitby jet on the top, and below it a spectra for material that's claimed to be jet from the Dorset coast in England. This paper was published saying there was a new source, potential source for jet finds in the south of England because this material was jet. I can see looking, especially at the fingerprint area of that spectra, this is not a jet. So using some other methods that I don't have available to me in my lab in Whitby, I have a research collaboration at Yale University at the Centre there for the Preservation of culturally important materials. Dr. Richard Hark and myself there have tested my sample suite with some other methods. So here we're looking at the elemental composition of jets. We've got laser-induced breakdown spectroscopy. So we use a laser to make a superheated plasma. Only really destroys a few nanograms of the material. It leaves a pinprick hole in jet. And we get 3 emissions for each element, one in the UV, one in the visible, and one in the infrared. And here we're looking at Spanish jet and Whitby jet, and really there's nothing to call between these spectra again. So the vibrational bonds in the jet are identical, and the elemental composition for Spanish and Whitby jet is almost identical. We've also looked at pyrolysis GC mass spectroscopy. This is looking at the organic constituents, which we would think maybe that would be more helpful because this is an organic material. And we do see differences in the spectra between the Spanish and Whitby material, but when we throw the artifact in the mix there in the middle, one of the Jamestown crosses, it's more complex. And although we feel there are more similarities between the Jamestown artifacts and the Whitby, we can't really call it country of origin. Where we are also using a mass spectroscopy technique is stable isotope analysis. So stable isotopes can be used to give information about the environmental and climatic conditions in which gemstones are formed. And we believe we're looking here at the environment when the jet was deposited rather than when the tree was growing, because we don't essentially know where these trees were coming from. And what you'll see here is delta 15 nitrogen plotted against delta 13 carbon. For the first time, we can separate Spanish and Whitby jet into 2 distinct camps. And the Jamestown, one of the crosses there, is firmly in the Whitby camp. So we're really hopeful that country of origin determination moving forward, we can use stable isotopes. So the early results, stylistically, I believe these things are similar to Whitby jet witch charms. My colleagues in Spain say they've never seen a crucifix like this, even in a Catholic 17th century Spanish jet context. The isotope analysis seems to support Whitby and England as country of origin, and this means we need to bring into question that early narrative regarding early American colonial history. I can't prove that there were no Catholics on those first ships, but what I do believe is we can't use the presence of these jet items to prove that there were Catholics. What this probably is evidence of folkloric beliefs crossing the Atlantic with those first settlers. And actually, gemological research can change history with these culturally important materials because country of origin really does matter. But I guess what you all really want to know is, did it work? Did it protect them from witchcraft? Well, the first witch trial on American soil was in 1626 in Virginia, where we've got Goodwife Joan Wright was accused, amongst other things, of predicting the death of a hen. She was also a left-handed midwife, so there was a lot of people didn't want her to deliver their baby. And she'd already been to court and actually found guilty of improperly hemming a skirt and had received a whipping for that. At her trial, another settler actually said she was a well-known witch from her hometown of Hull. Now, unfortunately, although we have the script from the trial, the colonial records were destroyed during the Civil War, but we think she got away with it. We don't think anybody was actually executed for witchcraft in Jamestown. Certainly, this trial, she seems to get off. But the interesting thing is, this is predating the Salem trials by at least 60 years. So it suggests that the witch mania might have come over on those first ships rather than something that maybe developed in the late 1600s. So thank you for listening. And yeah, have we got time for any questions?
Questions? Yes, go ahead. Right here.
I just wondered if you could go back to the remains of the casket of the Catholic
Yep.
heretic. That seems unusual.
Yeah, it is unusual. And, we do believe it's a Catholic reliquary. So we really don't know why on earth it's there. Obviously somebody was trying to signal Gabriel Archer out as a Catholic. But, you know, it's in the First Anglican Church. It shouldn't really be there. Maybe there was another reason and we simply don't know that reason. There was no suggestion that Gabriel Archer was a Catholic. He certainly wasn't tried with Edward Wingfield, who was found to be a Catholic. So, yeah, we don't know. We've no idea, unfortunately. And the Jamestown trustees won't open the casket, so it's purely on X-ray evidence that we think there's bones and some liquid in there.
How big is it?
It's only quite small, yeah.
What metal is it?
Silver. It's silver. Yeah. Yep.
I may have missed it because I was a little out of bed getting in, but is it possible that it's actually a family relic that predates the entire Anglican?
Yeah, possibly. Absolutely, possibly. But maybe it just meant something to somebody and they didn't want to part with it. I mean, if they'd have been caught with it, you know, you would be facing a heresy treason charge. You know, you couldn't be wandering around with Catholic reliquaries. They were completely removed. So, yeah, unusual that it's there. Yeah.
Go ahead.
If we don't know what to call it, and you sort of say jet is like a sort of term like cheese, are you advocating for name change, or would you just like it to be Whitby Jet?
Yeah, I mean, so in my research, I refer to them by their native tongue. So the Spanish jet is Atabache, Portuguese is Azavici, the Turkish is Oltutasha, the Siberian would be Gagat, not Gagate. Gagate's the Latin term. And the problem is we've got all these different terms that only translate into English as that 1 3-letter word jet. And there is no other word. And even though the Russians don't like the term Gagat being translated into English, what do we call it? You know, so I would say that's a Siberian sapropelite. That's the geological name for it. We don't need to put a name jet on it, really. And the geotag Whitby jet doesn't appear at all until the 20th century, and it's only when the Victorian industry, essentially we've mined jet out in the Whitby area by 1880, and they go out prospecting around the world. They buy tons of jet from Spain, tons of jet from France, and also tons of jet from Venezuela. And when that comes back into Whitby, some of it isn't very stable. It's not good in our damp climate. In fact, the Venezuelan jet is a sapropelite coal as well. It's not a true jet. And at that point, they try and legally protect Whitby jet, and they add the geotag Whitby to that. Prior to that, it was just jet. It wasn't Whitby jet. And jet doesn't actually outcrop in Whitby at all. It's north or south of there, so it's all very confusing.
So then all of those jets then would be considered the jet group?
Yeah, so I mean, I've spoken to mineralogists about this, and should we bring the nomenclature in turn with mineralogy? So I would class these as gem quality hydrocarbons or precious coals. And I know we don't like precious in gemology, but the Coral Commission uses precious coral, and I think organics are slightly different. You know, we do need a tree commission, so the jet and amber people can actually, you know, we'd like to bring all the manufacturers together to sort this out, because, you know, we can't protect our industries, and it's just we can't actually educate our customers at the point of sale because we don't know what these things are, you know. And I don't want to be fighting against Sibjo with their terminology. I should be dealing with, you know, country of origin, and I'm fighting problems like what colour is it, which is crazy. You know, the term jet black was coined in the 15th century and refers to the epitome of blackness. And all jets are jet black. No other colours acceptable. But, you know, that shouldn't be PhD level research. That's embarrassing. I knew that when I was 7. And it's the academics that are saying it can be these other colours without going and checking.
Is there a carbon dating on jet?
So we can't really use radiometric dating, although I've got high uranium in the Whitby jets. We're quite radioactive in the Whitby shales. And the jet's very leaky, so I've no lead. So I can't find the lead isotopes. Some of the Jamestown artifacts, to me, look like wood beads. But there are changes going on in these beads that look, there's features that are looking quite jet-like. So because Jamestown water levels are fluctuating, I think we might be seeing mummification of wood. So we're seeing changes in these wooden beads, which I think might have been bog oak beads, that are changing to look slightly jet-like. So I asked the trustees at Jamestown if we could radiocarbon date one of the wooden beads. They wouldn't allow me to sample. Radiocarbon dating, you need more material. They wouldn't allow me to sample the bead I wanted to sample, and they said, we've done one of the other ones. The date that came back was 26,000 years, which is really beyond the limit of radiocarbon dating, because we can only go up to 23,000 years. I was hoping for a date around about 1600. But what happened was the American archaeologists at Jamestown then went mad and said, oh my God, these beads are from the Paleolithic. I know they're not. They're not from the Paleolithic. It's just that radiocarbon, they're too old. So you can get dates that make the matters even worse. So yeah, we can't use, certainly, carbon dating for jets. They're too old.
Sorry,
Yeah.
one last. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Could these crucifixes have come north from St. Augustine?
Well, the other thing I really do need to build is my American jet databases. I need more samples. There are jets on American soil, and I just don't have enough samples. And we certainly know that the Acoma jet from New Mexico has been used for thousands of years. Certainly, ancestral Puebloan civilizations, the Zuni, Navajo, various native groups are using jet materials. Now most of them use the Siberian material rather than native jets. But I know there's a source historically that the Victorians were exploiting from near Denver. Can't find any good specimens to add to the database from there. So yeah, I do need, there's been no research really done on American jets ever. But I know it is here, so yeah, if anybody comes across any. Yes, Lee.
So is there any possibility of, for the industry, for the sales, for the trade, to have an identity card that just says true jet, and you list 4 factors
Yeah,
that makes
yeah.
that true jet?
Yeah. What I don't want to do, and in the 1990s, the Spanish Coal Board, trying to protect Spanish jet, did some research, and they worked very closely with the Venezuelans. There were at least 600 people in Bolivar City that claimed to make a living from working Venezuelan jet. The problem was when the Spanish Coal Board looked at the Venezuelan jet, it was a sapropelite coal. It's not as good as the Siberian material. And they wrote a paper saying, this is fake jet, it's not true jet. And what happened then is we had a lot of people that's livelihoods were threatened by what the Spanish had done. So, irrelevant as to whether the material is a true jet or whether it's a sapropel, often we see that native populations are doing the same thing with it. So we're working, we're carving snakes. What I don't want to do is affect your livelihood by saying he's not using genuine jet, he's using this gagat stuff that's from Siberia. So it's how do the indigenous people that work it, how do we all work together to come up with a system that doesn't, we don't want to be elitist necessarily, say, well, if you're not working a true jet, then it has no value. So yeah, it's a tricky one. I don't want to ruin the industry, to cause more problems, certainly to the Venezuelans. They're really, really concerned that their industry is struggling because of academic research that's been done that's actually discredited their material. So yeah, it's a tricky one, really. And I know certainly speaking to the Amber Council in Poland, they do have certification systems, but FTIR very quickly, very easily tells you where exactly on the planet all amber's from. Country of origin isn't problematic for them. It is way more problematic for us.